Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, April 30th, 2024. Tonight's topic is love and fear, one of my very favorite topics, something I often would talk to clients in the field about as they were navigating their mental health journey. So I'm really excited to share with you I think, some fresh ideas and perspective on this idea of the love and the fear that works in our bodies. Before I get into that, I'm going to start off by just reminding you of our Finding You intensives. Our flagship program for our intensives is Finding You. And it's based on this idea that if you get in touch with yourself, if you do your own work, if you understand what happened to you, if you increase in your self-awareness, improve the relationship with yourself, that will have a dramatic impact on all your relationships, specifically on your parenting journey. So if you're looking for what I think is the best investment in the shortest period of time that you can make, not just for yourself, not just for your marriage, but also for your child, Finding You is that offering. And the research is clear that the better that we know ourselves, the more clearly we understand our own histories, the more capable we are of providing our children with what they need along their journey. So Finding You is that offering. The next in-person offering is June 19th through 23rd. We have one per month. And then May 17th through 19th, it is $4,800, 4.5 days, all included. We pick you up at the airport and drop you back off. So contact intensives@evoketherapy.com, go to our website, or email us at webinar@evoketherapy.com. So with that, let me go into tonight's broadcast. I actually have a couple of ideas that I want to set up before we go into talking about love and fear that might seem initially off the beaten path, a little bit away from the topic that I want to talk about tonight. And the first one is a quote from Marie Louise von France. She's a Jungian therapist, and she wrote, Carl Jung has said that to be in a situation where there is no way out, or to be in a conflict where there is no solution, is the classical beginning of the process of individuation. It is meant to be a situation without solution. The unconscious wants the hopeless conflict in order to put ego consciousness up against the wall. Ego consciousness is that part of us that makes sense out of everything and comes to the conclusion and really just tries to be right, tries to be good. So back to the quote. The unconscious wants the hopeless conflict in order to put ego consciousness up against the wall, so that the man has to realize that whatever he does is wrong. Whichever way he decides will be wrong. This is meant to knock out the superiority of the ego, which always acts from the illusion that it has the responsibility of decision. Now, why would I read something about coming into this process of individuation, coming up against situations, conflict, decisions that there's not a winning solution? Nowhere can you go to look for the right answer. It's because I think love and fear. When I posted that as a topic, I imagine many people who got the invitation thought, "Oh, those are such general topics that are talked about constantly. What could I possibly imagine beyond what I already know?" And really, what we're talking about is we're talking about these two primal energies, largely coming from the unconscious, right? We make so many decisions out of fear or in the absence of love. And we have the illusion in our conscious mind that we're here making decisions. And we have no idea that beneath it all, behind it all, there's some more powerful force. I love this song that I'm going to read you the lyrics to from Pink Floyd. I think it's funny that the music that I listened to as a kid and Pink Floyd, this song was even a little bit earlier than my prime of listening to music. But listening to the music of the past, of the 60s and 70s, and what I think many parents of those days thought was not good for us, was unhealthy, was weird, or just involved in the drug culture. Now I can reflect back on it and see the absolute wisdom and poetry of it. This is the song "Wish You Were Here," written by David Gilmour and Roger Waters of Pink Floyd. And again, I'll make the connection to tonight's broadcast after I read it, and I'll try not to read it like I'm singing, and that's hard to do. So they write, "So you think you can tell heaven from hell, blue skies from pain? Can you tell a green field from a cold steel rail? a smile from a veil. Do you think you can tell? That they get you to trade your heroes for ghosts, hot ashes for trees, hot air for a cool breeze, cold comfort for change. Did you exchange a walk on part in the war for a lead role in a cage? How I wish you were here. We're just two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl, year after year. Running over the same old ground, what have we found? The same old fears. Wish you were here. The reason I chose to read this song, these lyrics to you this evening, is because I think we imagine that we have a lay of the landscape. I think we see things clearly. I think we think we know who's driving the bus. We think it's us. But the less work that we've done, and it doesn't matter how good your childhood was, it doesn't matter if you imagine that you've had little to no trauma, if you haven't done the excavation, the work to discover what's underneath, what fears are hidden, what impulses, what your impulses are being driven by. If you haven't done that, you're living an illusion. And while we might imagine that we can tell the difference between heaven and hell, there are so many parents who can't. And what I mean by that is they're constantly they come by it honestly. There's no there's no criticism in this. It's just a description. There are so many times in our life when we think that the problem is out there. We think that we're being caused to feel miserable. And we think that what's causing us to feel miserable is our love for other people, our love for our children who are struggling and suffering with mental health and addiction issues. But we don't know that that is a process that can be transcended. That is a process that can evolve. We can find peace in the current situation. We can find peace in every step, as the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh would often say. We can find happiness and joy here and now in the face of very difficult circumstances, especially with our children. The two primary forces that move in us are love and fear. It is vital that we learn to know the difference between the two. Thich Nhat Hanh said, "To love without knowing how to love wounds the person that we love." I love this quote so much. So many times I have seen people from either side of the equation, either on the receiving end or on the giving end, describe the motives beneath abusive behavior as love, or dismissing the abusive behavior and describing the person as loving, either the person in themselves or the person that's acting toward them. And tonight I'm going to make the case that that's just not true. That if love is just reduced to some romantic, ethereal idea, it has no value. If it's just a feeling in us, it is essentially worthless. I have seen parents abuse children who have claimed to love them dearly. I have seen one spouse abuse another spouse who claims to love them desperately. So tonight we're going to explore a little bit deeper and understand what these forces are and where they're coming from and how to recognize them. When I talk about parenting, one of the things that I get asked more, in fact, almost always get asked, is some version of the question, what should I do in a given situation? And I don't answer that question, not because I'm tied to some technique where I'm not allowed to answer that question. I don't answer that question because it doesn't make sense. It's not the issue at hand. Virtually, the issue is never what should I do. The word should doesn't make any sense, by the way, just for starters. But really, it's about a way of being with somebody, a way of where are you operating from? I give the example in the journey of the heroic parent about the parent who called me asking for advice about whether or not they should bring cigarettes requested by their adult son, their adult child. And when the parents called me to ask my opinion about whether or not they should bring these cigarettes to their child, who made the request respectfully, who wasn't breaking the law, they asked the question, what should we do? And I said to them, I can imagine you bringing the cigarettes and giving it to your child and saying at the moment that you hand them over to the child, saying, you know how I feel about smoking. You know I don't want you to smoke, but I'm giving you these cigarettes as a symbol that I'm not in charge of it. I'm not going to try to control it anymore. And that would be just fine. And I can also imagine you coming, not bringing the cigarettes and saying to your child, I'm not willing to participate in buying and transporting them to you. You can smoke if you want to. I'm not going to talk to you about it anymore. You know how I feel about it, but I'm not going to participate in getting them for you. And the point of the answer to the question is it's not the behavior. It's not should I get divorced? It's not should I stay married? It's not should I send my child to therapy or how many hours of screen time is the right amount for a child to have? Those questions can never be answered. Not with any lasting value. The question really starts off with the relationship that you have with yourself and your own mental health. The relationship you have to love and to fear, and then the relationship you have to the person who's asking the question, or where the question is embedded in, the relationship with your child or with your partner. And if you do it from a place of fear, which means you're probably going to try to control outcomes, which means you're going to lose your creativity, because when our brains go into a fear response, we lose access to the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that reasons well, that is creative, that can anticipate cause and effect, and look to the future and see how choices today impact the future. All of those higher level cognitive functions. If you're in your fear, you're going to lose access to that. And what you're going to be seeking for primarily when operating from a fear response is safety. And while safety might not seem to be a harmful thing, it gets in the way of development. It gets in the way of the relationship. It makes the child's behavior or the other person's behavior essentially responsible for how you're feeling. You try to control somebody else's feelings so that pain doesn't happen, so that sadness and failure doesn't happen. Conversely, if it comes from a place of love, it's hard to get it wrong. So part of the curriculum that I teach and that I write about and that we espouse at Evoke, part of our curriculum is to understand that the wisdom isn't in the decisions or the behavior. The wisdom is in the sensibility or the way of being. The relationship that we have with ourselves, which extends to the relationship we have to our child or to the other person and to their issues. Who among us, as quoted in the Eden Project, my favorite book on couples, who among us can ever know ourselves well enough to be capable of agape? He writes, an expression of what we might oxymoronically call disinterested love. That is, love wholly invested in the well-being of the other, without the shadow of self-interest, cruising beneath the surface like a shark. When we talk about loving with detachment, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about agape. We're talking about loving somebody in such a way that they feel free. But that love doesn't abandon you. That doesn't mean that you're not allowed to set boundaries, to follow through on consequences, and to enforce values that you have in your life. It doesn't mean that. It means that you're aware of all of that, and at the same time, you're aware that the child has different tasks and goals than you do. And that changes as they age, as they develop. In the earliest phases, it's just about taking care of primary needs and responding to those. And later on, it becomes about giving them wings, separating. And during adolescence, the primary goal, the primary drive, the primary task of the adolescence is the sense of self. And that will run straight in the face of security. So, what's the answer? The answer is you have to find security in your own body. You might think of it as faith. Faith in a higher power can absolutely provide this for you. The Buddhists call it radical acceptance. Taoists call it the Tao or the way. Star Wars refers to it as the Force. It's this trust that you'll be able to deal with whatever comes. And that one of the most important parts of adolescence or childhood is making lots of mistakes, experimenting with life, discovering how you are. And you get to be the one to decide what that looks like because of the power differential. Unless your child takes it into their own hands and says, "This is not working for me. My needs aren't being valued. I can't get them met in this context, so I'm going to get them met in these symptomatic ways." I love Star Wars, of course, and this is a quote from Yoda, who was, of course, created by George Lucas, who based his work on the work of Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. Yoda said, "Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering." To make a long story short, in the where we first entered the Star Wars saga, we met Darth Vader. But what we found out later was that Darth Vader was a child of significant trauma. And as he grew into young adulthood and fell in love, found the love of his life, he became aware of the prophecy that she was going to die. So to prevent this absolutely horrible event from happening, he succumbed to the dark side. Or in other words, he succumbed to the philosophy that we can control things outside of us. Because he didn't have, this is really important, because Anakin Skywalker didn't have a secure attachment experience and couldn't go to his own body, to himself, couldn't sit with pain and difficulty, had no source, if you will, of that security and that strength, that attachment. He resulted to what most people result to when they are left alone in their trauma or aren't supported through their trauma during childhood. He resorted to the tendency to try to control everybody else. And like I always mention, Darth Vader did not think he was the problem. He thought he was the solution. Yes, there would be casualties, but he thought the way to bring order to the universe, to life, to his life, was to try to control people. And that's what the dark side is about. It's this urge in all of us. It's a metaphor that speaks to all of us, that when we are directed by fear, when we are living in fear, when fear has us, we're going to project out into the world hate and paranoia. We're going to try to control things. We're going to use our anger as a bodyguard to protect us against the immense emptiness that we feel, the immense terror that we feel in our own bodies. Very simply put, written by J.D. Gill in the book The Letters of Juliet to the Knight in Rusty Armor, she wrote, I realize that what we do to stay safe wounds others. I've mistyped it on the slide. I'm sorry. I realize that what we do to stay safe wounds others. That the things that we do to protect ourselves, that's all this is. It's just an ego defense. The call, the ask for us parents is not to be perfect and to get it right. It's not to listen to my broadcasts and figure out what are the secrets and all the things you should say and shouldn't say and the way that you should say it. Although that's what I get asked about the most, because that seems applicable, practical. It seems to people to be the most immediate problem presenting itself. But this is a transformation of consciousness. This is becoming more mature. This is growing up. This is dealing with the things that we've avoided up to this point in our lives, facing the things, the fear that we have avoided up to this point in our lives. And so when we make a mistake, when we harm the child, even if that harm is significant, even if that harm has happened through many years, I've done this to my children. And I love them as much as I'm capable of loving another human being. And I have hurt and dented my children. But that's not where the real deep trauma happens. The real deep trauma happens when I can't own it. I can't apologize. I can't see my part in it. And again, I've said this, it's not the apology that makes the difference. You can't apologize your way out of this. The apology is just evidence that you recognize that you're a part of the dynamic, that you're a part of the cycle, that you're owning your part. So what our children need from us is not to be perfect. They need us to own our stuff, to learn to apologize, to see that we have some culpability in all of this. that we have some contribution. That is the heroic journey. And what happens when we make a mistake, especially if we make it over a prolonged period of time and we see the effects on our children in terms of their mental illness or addiction, what happens in those situations? We want to run away. We want to deny it. We want to justify it, rationalize it, explain it. We want to gaslight them. We don't think of it as gaslighting them, but it is that. What children suffer from the most is our ego defenses, not from the mistakes that we make, is our need to be good. Because if we're good and we're doing everything right, and we're just saints who just want the best for them and just love them, if that's all it's about, then the painful, difficult feelings that they must be having in relation to us must mean that something about them is crazy or weird. And then they go out in the world and don't know who they are. And then they end up in situations, in schools, on a path in life that isn't theirs. They end up in relationships that are unhealthy for them, and they don't know how to leave because they've been taught to just trust their own bodies. We have to confront our fear. Children who struggle with mental illness and addictions, in part, this is not wholly the goal of the behavior, but in part, they are there to expose in us our underdeveloped and our immature parts. I wrote this. I wrote, if we wish to be free, to be our authentic self, to be who we are, we must become that's what we were told to fear. We have to understand that this idea of should and should, this idea of guilt and right and wrong is not working for us. It seems like that's morality. It seems like that those are good guides, helpful guides. But I cannot tell you how off the mark those are for moral development, for a more evolved, spiritual, psychological, whole, and healthy life. We have to get in touch with what's going on for us. We have to understand how pain manifests itself. We have to understand what our trauma responses are. We have to understand how our undone work is having its way on our children. Alan Watts, the Buddhist teacher, said, when you find out that there was never anything to be on the dark side to be afraid of, nothing is left but love. And I found this out in my own life, on my own path of differentiation, specifically, most profoundly, between the years 2010 and 2012, when I was separated from my wife. And at that point, I questioned everything. And I got rid of anything I'd been taught about right and wrong and good and evil, because I tried all of it and it got me nowhere. And I started to choose myself, which sounds very self-focused and selfish. But I started to choose what was going to make me happy, because if I didn't, I don't think I could have survived it. I resisted the urge to go away. I resisted the urge to kill myself. And I decided to live and to find joy. And I started as I started to follow myself, as I accepted, this is the way that I say it, as I accepted everybody's judgment that I was the bad guy, that I was the devil, I was free. Once I didn't need to prove that I wasn't, once I was okay with that part of me, I just accepted it. I was tired of trying to prove it to them that I wasn't. I was tired of trying to impress them. I was tired of trying to recruit people around me to tell me and others that I was good. I just surrendered. I gave up. Okay, I'm a bad husband. I'm a bad father. I'm a bad partner and a bad friend. Whatever it is, I accept that. I'm me. I have dents and bruises that haven't quite healed, and they show up in my behavior towards others. And I see it. Once I did that, once I stopped using all of my energy for the ego defense of being good, as I've written, one of the characteristics that almost all dysfunctional families share is the idea that they have to believe and act as if the parents are good. Once I surrendered the idea of being good, nothing was left but love. All I wanted to do then was take all of that energy that had been allocated toward defending myself, trying to be this good guy. And once that energy was freed up, all I wanted to do was love other people, to give people grace, to give people support. I was kinder. I didn't walk all over people to prove that I was good. I didn't create hierarchy and toxic relationships. I started understanding that other people were suffering and scared just like I was. And I know what I needed. I knew what I needed in that situation. Though I had made choices that you could say were self-chosen and causing me my pain to some degree, I still needed grace. I still needed love. And the great risk that we all feel in giving love to somebody who's acting badly is that it will just reinforce it. We think again in terms of behavioral. And yet all of the myths, all of the stories that we love show examples where the hero, the protagonist in the story, makes a big mistake and is shown grace. And not only does it heal them, but they spend the rest of their life serving other people in the same way. That's what pay it forward means. Can't talk about love without talking about Gandhi's definition of love. And it relates to the fear part of the discussion this evening also. He wrote, "A coward is incapable of exhibiting love. It is the prerogative of the brave. Projection, fusion, going home is easy. Loving another's otherness is heroic. If we really love as other, we have heroically taken on the responsibility for our own individuation, our own journey. And this heroism may properly be called love. Where there is love, there is no fear. Where there is fear, there is no love. Love takes courage. Love love looks like you looking in a mirror. Love looks like looking at your part in things. And you might think that you don't have a part in it. You might think you only have 2% of the 100% of the equation. Doesn't matter how much. Doesn't matter if it's 1%. Spend 100% of your energy looking at that 1%, and as you learn to love yourself and forgive yourself in the ways that I'm describing this evening, you'll find that 1% expanding and getting larger and larger, and you'll come to discover that you are the reason that you are unhappy. I've been thinking all week about this idea that I've read from many different people, many different sources, that they say that the project of taking back one's projections, in other words, of realizing that the problem isn't out there. I'm not unhappy because my child is using drugs. That causes me pain. There is sadness in that and there is fear in that. But fundamentally, that's not the responsibility for my unhappiness, my baseline unhappiness. I'm responsible for that, or my marriage, or the people out there. Taking back your projections means taking on the responsibility of your own life, taking on the heroic task of looking at yourself. And to love other as other. Other means they're not you. And that is so hard for us parents. We become so identified with our children, and the culture reinforces that. But Gandhi makes the point, as do many therapists and psychologists in child development make. He makes the point that if you're going to love somebody as they are, you're going to have to do your own work. You're going to have to face your fear. I just saw a quote the other day from Jack Black. I love Jack Black, the comedian and actor and singer. And if you don't know, Jack Black is loves music, plays in a band with his brother, and just loves rock and roll. And I saw this quote the other day on my social media where he was describing that he was seeing that his children were listening to music that was scaring him. And he was saying, I have to remind myself that my music scared my parents too. And that's just the way that it worked. In fact, that's the goal of the music. The goal of our children's music is to drive a wedge when they are unable because of the circumstances, when they are unable to individuate, to differentiate from us, to become who they are, separate from us. When they're unable to do that in healthy ways, they will seek less than healthy ways. They will do it by all out rebellion, right? The police sheriff's child gets arrested, right? The teacher's child flunks out of school. The therapist's child develops mental illness and needs treatment. The point of it is, in part, I am not you. You don't own me. I'm my own person. And again, if you automatically go to when I talk about this idea of love, to this place where it abdicates you of any responsibility. No, not. It takes more work to love in this way. It takes more consciousness. It takes more courage to operate in the way that I'm describing. And you have to make decisions. I have 2 quotes that I want to share that talk about this mix up between fear and love. These are both from The Audacity to Be You. I wrote, I have heard clinicians suggest that boundary violations, parental anxiety, or attempts at control are simply too much love, as in, you love them too much. If we understand what love is, we would understand that you cannot love too much. If you start to love too much, it becomes something else. You can't be too free of cancer. Your body can't be too healthy. To understand love, I went on to write, to understand love, we must separate anxiety, fear of rejection, and the need to control from love. Those have nothing to do with love. I have also heard people justify others' behaviors toward them by attributing it to love or some other benevolent intent. As in, I know they meant well, but what they did hurt. I've heard parents and partners passionately express love, even though they demonstrated overt physical and sexual abuse. Frankly, if those kinds of behaviors can happen under the cover of love, then love itself loses its meaning. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is clear. Love is courageous. Love is assertive. Love is honest. Love is knowing. Love can be measured to a large extent. This might be the simplest way to say it. The love that you have for your children or your partner may be best measured by how much work you're willing to do on yourself. That's the measure of love. And that doesn't mean that you'll come to the conclusion, that any specific conclusion, like I'm going to stay married, or I'm going to send my child to treatment, or take them home, or send them to college, or limit their screen. It doesn't lead to those behaviors. But it leads to a clarity, a courage. And since, like I read at the beginning, we have no way sometimes in these situations of choosing the right answer. There is no right answer. We just have to choose. We have to choose how to lose, as I often say. Because that is true, that's what love allows us to do. This next quote was given to me, what was stated by my daughter, my oldest daughter. She wrote, one of the most loving things a parent can do is be willing to I'll start over. One of the most loving things a parent can do is be willing to be cast as the villain in their child's story. And I'm not talking about that old idea of, if they're mad at me, that means I'm doing a good job. I'm saying, let them be angry at you. Let them be sad. Let them be frustrated. Let them be hurt. I have heard children in our program say, yes, the rules are intense. Yes, the living conditions in wilderness therapy are very, very difficult. I've heard them say all of those things. But I've also heard those same children say over and over again, I felt more free than I ever have in my life. And when I follow up and ask questions, it's because they were allowed to be mad at the staff. They were allowed to not like it. They were allowed not to agree. But because we haven't worked out our own ego, we find that very difficult. We're using our children as a mirror, reflecting back to us our sense of worth. And so for our own benefit, we have to separate. And if we won't or we can't, the child might do it in a very, very messy way. Anne Lamott, the novelist, wrote, the most profound thing we have to offer our children is our own healing. Again, I think that's the measure of love. Love is seeing, hearing, and understanding. Love is not fear. Fear is not bad. Fear is not wrong. It's just not love. If you are anxious about your child, that's just anxious. It's okay. And you might have very good reasons to be anxious or afraid. But don't call it love. It is possible to love your child, to be worried about their behaviors, and to not be so affected by your anxieties and your fears. That is possible. That combination does exist. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow talked about this ability to see other people. He said, if we could read the secret history of our enemies, we would find in each man's story suffering sufficient to disarm all hostility. In other words, if we could see people, we wouldn't feel angry or hostile toward them. We would feel compassionate. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't have any boundaries, that we would abandon our boundaries. It just means that they would come from a place of love, not from a place of fear and hate and anger and trying to control them or punish them. I love the quote by Abraham Lincoln. "I do not like that man," he said. "I must get to know him." That's what this means. You have to get out of your own head. Parenting is an opportunity, and I've shared this before, to relearn life, not to teach it to the child, but to relearn life. In this model that I'm talking about tonight, the child becomes the teacher and you become the student. So, anxiety is a lack of self. Anxiety is a lack of safety in you. Anxiety is a trauma response if it is acted out on, right? Everybody's going to feel anxiety. I feel anxiety. But if it has us, right? If it's driving the bus, then we're acting out of our trauma. So when someone says that you just love your child too much, you can gently, kindly correct them and say, it's not that I love them too much. Is that sometimes my fear gets overwhelming. I absolutely do love them, but sometimes my fear casts a large shadow over my love for them. We develop a sense of self, and this sense of self is not threatened or compromised by our understanding and compassion of the other. We don't let our empathy rob us of our boundaries, which is so easy for so many of us to do. I love what was written in the Letters of Juliet in another place. That book that I mentioned that was written by my therapist, Jamie Gill, JD Gill. She wrote, "It was so hard for me, dear Knight," writing a letter to her husband, Knight, "to admit that I had brought others what I wanted, not what they wanted. I called this caring or nurturing before." When we wake up, we realize how many of the most important questions we have accepted the wrong answers for. And it's devastating. It can be overwhelming. That's why it can best be sometimes processed and dealt with a therapist or a support group. Because when you wake up to who you are, it's painful. It's agonizing. It's difficult. But on the other side of that is just more love and freedom. Winnicott said that loving somebody's otherness, or in other words, seeing them, means that they exist. To be seen is to exist, is what he taught. So we have to do our own work. We have to find out what's going on inside of our own bodies and from our history. We have to do that what they call inner child work to understand what's driving us. You don't have to judge it. In fact, judging any of this work as good and bad, right or wrong, will get in the way of your awareness. If you're looking for good answers or right answers, if you're looking to avoid wrong answers and the bad stuff, you will not find it. You will never discover the truth. You've got to approach this outside of those constructs. And what you find is the most absolutely beautiful thing in the world, which is you find yourself. And when you find yourself, everybody else becomes clear and the relationships around you start to get into focus also. Learning how to be with somebody in their unsolvable problems, learning to resist the impulse, to fix, to change, to advise, to share an opinion. So many parents want to give lectures. Believe me, I'm a professional lecturer. I know this. I have this as much as anybody. But what we know is that listening is so much more valuable. Understanding and being being very, very infrequently giving advice or answers. And this is not going to lead to your children not learning lessons. It's going to lead them to discovering themselves and learning about love and figuring out their life. And one of the problems that we have in parenting is that we've been taught to hate the parts about ourselves that are that are true. We've been taught to hate our narcissism, to hate our own borderline features, our fear responses, our trauma, our addictions. We've been taught to hate our bodies, the way we treat food, the way we self-medicate. We've been taught to hate our trauma and our trauma responses. But that doesn't work. Doesn't work for us and it doesn't work for them. As the Buddha said, hatred does not cease by hatred, only by love. This is the eternal rule. We have to learn to love ourselves. We have to learn to listen to our mental health symptoms. We have to listen to our trauma responses, listen to our self-medicating behaviors without judgment. Listen to them. They are messengers. And if you can learn to listen to yourself and to see what that's the heart of everything, it will be easy to extend that to your child. So instead of getting angry at their ridiculous and unhealthy behavior, you are compassionate and clear in your response. It starts with loving yourself. Not just the good and the pretty and the talented and the successful parts of yourself. That's easy. But the dark parts of yourself, the parts of yourself that you were taught to hate and to not love. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "Love in Buddhism," he said, "always begins with yourself. Before the manifestation of the other person in your life, the teaching of love in Buddhism is that when you go home to yourself, you recognize the suffering in you. Then the understanding of your own suffering will help you to feel better and to love because you feel the completeness, the fulfillment in yourself. So you don't need another person to begin to love. You can begin with yourself. It starts with the relationship you have with yourself. And if you don't love, let alone see your horrible, rotten self, the parts of yourself that you're not proud of, if you don't learn to see those and develop compassion toward them, you won't be able to do them for your children. And when you can't do them for yourself or for your child, symptoms multiply. Mental illness grows. But we've been terrified of this. We've been terrified. We've been taught to be terrified of loving ourselves. Not the good parts, but the parts that are silly or stupid or idiotic or underdeveloped. We've been taught that if we hate those parts of ourselves, we will get better and better and gooder and gooder. And that is not how it works. The science of therapy and mental health teach us just the opposite. We're afraid to be selfish. But selfishness is a trauma response. Individuating, becoming yourself, differentiating, loving yourself, valuing yourself, prioritizing yourself, knowing yourself. These are all steps along the way to greater mental health, greater compassion toward others. I wrote this. I said, if your heart doesn't break for poor dying people, then you have not learned self-love. For if you loved all the parts of yourself, you would find yourself in every face you see. When sages tell us to love others as we love ourselves, I don't think of it as a commandment, but rather a statement about the way things are. Our ability to love others is the measure of how much we have come to love ourselves. The philosopher Charles Eisenstein explains why, when we read of mass die-offs of the coral reefs and see their bleached skeletons, do we feel like we have sustained a blow? It is because it is literally happening to ourselves, our extended selves. If you learn to love yourself, if you do this inner work, you will see what the mystics talk about when they see no separation between self and other. So when I see somebody that's doing horrible in the world, I can see myself in that. When I see somebody else doing something that seems strange, I can find a way to understand where they're coming from and see how much more helpful I can be from an understanding and compassionate place. One guru was asked the question by one of his followers. The question was, how are we to treat others? And the master responded, there are no others. The reason that we feel so much pain, especially at a time when we're being bombarded by the news cycle, we're getting in real time suffering from all over the world all the time. Why does it cause us so much trauma and stress in our bodies? Because it's happening to us, because they are an extension of us. Let me go over a few thoughts about love and fear and where to differentiate them. I've made it clear that they are not the same, that being worried about your child's behavior is fine, but that's a worry. Being scared is being scared, and loving is something different. Love tends to be a giving thing. Love means you have capacity. Love means you're bigger than the situation at the moment, bigger than the other person. You can hold space. You can be patient. You can be compassionate. Love is a giving thing. Needing, on the other hand, is a taking thing. Again, not bad, not wrong, but it's not the same thing. To need somebody or to be dependent upon them is not necessarily to love them. And that scares a lot of parents because our children start off very dependent upon us. And my question is all often, what will happen when they don't need you financially? Will they still want to come over and visit? Will they do it out of obligation because a good kid does that? Frankly, I hope not. Or will they do it because you're a safe, wonderful place to be? It's okay to need people, but don't confuse loving and needing. They are different things. As an extension of that, in sharing and intimacy, talking tends to be the taking thing. If I'm talking and sharing, yes, it might take courage to tell the truth. I might be, and I am in real life, a codependent and feel responsible for how you react. So I have to confront that and deal with that. But if I am talking and sharing, I'm asking for you to listen. I'm asking for you to give. And if I'm listening, I'm giving. And so many of our fights and arguments are because we don't know the difference between taking in the process of talking and listening. When you're lecturing and talking to your kids, you are taking energy from them. That's why they are rolling their eyes. That's why they are sighing those loud sighs. That's why they are nodding their head mechanically. They just wanted to get over because they know you need this and they know you have power over them. Listening is more like love, more like giving. It is it really is the underappreciated part of intimacy. In psychotherapy, what makes a good psychotherapist is what they don't say. I think what makes a good parent in many ways is what they don't say. Pick and choose. Pick and choose your moments. Pick and choose your battles. And realize that sometimes letting somebody fail and trip is important. Letting them suffer, letting them figure it out, letting them hate you because you're not solving the problem. And another point I want to make about love is not codependence. Codependence is not even the same as dependence. It's another example in psychology of a silly word. It doesn't mean dependence. It means a lack of self. It means my sense of self is your responsibility. It means how you feel and think about me is a reflection of me, not about you. It is a lack of self and a lack of recognition of the other. We all need people. We all have to depend upon people. That's part of the deal of being human. But codependence is some attachment trauma, some way of being in our family, the way that we were taught to be with others and with each other that ultimately malfunctions and shows up symptomatically. Codependence, in my opinion, is almost always underneath all addictions and self-medicating behaviors. And that is because it's not a really effective way of taking care of ourselves. So we end up taking from other people. We end up hurting other people, asking for help through these symptoms. Love asks, what can I do for you? What do you need from me? And needing asks, can you give me this or that? I'm hurting or scared, unsettled or anxious, and need something from you. Both are perfectly okay. It is when we confuse the two or conflate the two that we get into trouble. Like I said, dependence is not codependence, and love is not codependence. So, what is the work? We have to grieve. We have to grieve and let go of the old way. We have to learn to feel. Just like that first slide with the second slide with the song from Pink Floyd. You have to learn to feel the difference. Feel what's working in your body. Ultimately, you have to take care of yourself. Because if you don't, you'll ask other people to take care of you at their expense unconsciously. So what do we do with the fear, with the hurt, with the anger? You take it to somebody who can hold it, which almost is never the child. There's no real great wisdom in learning how to tell your children how you feel all the time, especially if the intent is to get them to change their behavior. That's especially toxic. Take your fear, take your hurt, take your pain, your anger, your sadness, and talk to a therapist or another adult. Not somebody who's going to give you an answer or solve it for you, but somebody that can just sit with you. Maybe share their own experience or story if you're open to that. But mostly just sit and witness it with you. And over time, you learn that you're okay. You learn that when you are in pain, it's okay. You don't have to run away. You don't have to escape it because somebody sat with you. You can now sit with yourself. That's what attachment does for you. When we learn to sit with ourselves, we're able to listen and to hear other people. We become a part of the healing work of our children. And we heal. What can I do to expand and offer love to another who is suffering, who may make it very hard sometimes to love them? I can take care of myself somewhere else. So when we tell you to go to your 12-step meetings or the other parents like me, our new partnership, when we tell you to go to these various groups to get help, yes, it helps you, but it also makes you more available to the child to love them. Somebody wrote, I did not come to teach you. I came to love you, and love will be your teacher. That's the idea here today. Deal with your trauma, big T, small t, whatever it is. Look at yourself, become more aware, understand what's working in your body. Notice the difference between love and fear, between love and anxiety. Separate them, get clear about them. And this will allow you to be there for other people. Thich Nhat Hanh, I didn't plan on sharing all of his quotes today, it just came that way as I put it together. He said, the secret of creating peace is that when you listen to another person, you have only one purpose: to offer him an opportunity to empty his heart. And that's rare. Thich Nhat Hanh also wrote, you must love in such a way that the other person you love feels free. And that's ultimately the goal with this parenting thing. The goal is for them not to need you as much as they do today. The goal is to change that need into a want because you're a safe place to go. You want to be their first call. But if you react with a gasp or a shriek when they get themselves into a situation, a pickle, a difficult because of their choices, and you react with I told you so energy or with fear, you're not safe. They'll need to go somewhere else. You are then not a resource. You have to learn what love is and how it works in your body. And it's much different than most of us were taught. Love takes courage, means you have to face fear. Your capacity to love will be, in a large measure, the result of your ability to face fear, how much you've been able to face your fear. And it will be the condition that creates self-awareness. Because if you're still in the business of good and bad, right and wrong, look what it did for Adam and Eve in that story in the Bible. I'm not a religious person, but it's a great story. The minute they got wrapped up in good and evil, after they ate the fruit, they separated themselves from God. They covered themselves up. They hid from God. This is what that is about. This is what that story is about. The best way to understand others or to understand somebody's otherness is to understand yourself. And to start to learn to practice the difference between giving and taking, to know the difference. To know the difference between when you are taking from somebody, when you are needing. And it's so hard because we don't want to need. We hate needing. We were shamed for needing as children. Babies that don't cry are called good babies. Babies that are colicky and have a lot of needs and can't be soothed, they're not called good babies. We learn from infancy, from the first night on this planet, that to need is to be bad. So it's so hard for us to admit to ourselves what we are taking from our children and from each other. And if you're a good sharer, ask yourself, are you a good listener? And if you're a good listener, ask yourself if you're a courageous talker. This is the work. This is the invitation to the heroic journey. All right, folks. To further your education and support in this area, we encourage you to try 6 of any of the following 12-step support groups. any combination of Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. You can also go to RefugeRecovery.org or the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, for free classes and resources in your local community. Our new partnership is with Other Parents Like Me. Other Parents Like Me is an online platform built on the foundation of parents supporting parents. OPLM provides 17 weekly Zoom meetings designed for caregivers of teens and young adults facing mental health challenges, led by trained peer parent facilitators. This is an authentic and safe community where parents actively engage, support each other, and find valuable resources. Another good place to go with your pain, your sadness, and your fear. Other Parents Like Me. Check them out. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. Like I mentioned at the outset, if you want to do a deep dive into your own work or to accelerate the therapy you're already doing, to get essentially 6 months or 2 years worth of therapy in just 4.5 days, Finding You is that opportunity. June 19th through 23rd is our next offering. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com. Look at the QR code here on the screen or just go to our website. We're having a Finding You in New York City this summer, July 31st through August 4th. This is the one Finding You I'll be running this year. So if you want to attend a Finding You want to visit New York City, you can combine your trip for self-improvement along with your visit to Broadway, July 31st through August 4th with me. We have an online offering once a month. It's about once every 6 weeks or so. It's about half of the time and a third of the cost, and you don't have to travel. So if time and money are limited resources and a challenge for you, online Finding You is a great opportunity to do a deep dive in your own work. We have support groups for our current and alumni parents of our wilderness program. May 2nd, this week, is that next offering at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting. May 20th is that offering at 6 p.m. And then our intensives and coaching clients and alumni have a meeting once a month, a support group. May 13th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is that next offering. For more questions, use the QR code, go to our website, or email us at supportgroups@evoketherapy.com. We have coaches. If you want a coach that can work with you virtually anywhere, contact coaching@evoketherapy.com to have a coach matched up for your needs. Maybe you have a child coming home. Maybe your child is in treatment and you want that extra support. You want a place to go that can be about you, talking about what's going on for you. A lot of the work that I've talked about here tonight. All these broadcasts are available on the podcast app one day after airing. Just go to Spotify or your favorite podcast app and search Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen to us there. And also on YouTube, on Evoke's YouTube channel, you can watch the video rebroadcasts of these with the slides there. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. Also, Evoke Therapy Intensives has an account on Instagram with announcements, inspirational quotes, using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog has wonderful content each week. All right, folks. Sorry about last week. I missed last week due to technical difficulties. So I will be having another question and answer. If you have any questions that you have from listening to this tonight or anytime, you can email us at webinar@evoketherapy.com. This is an email address where you can get copies of slides if you want them. If you want to have the slides that I shared tonight, you can ask for those slides. So webinar@evoketherapy.com for questions, suggestions, requests, anything and everything in terms of this broadcast. So I'll be back this Thursday, May 2nd at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. That'll be a live Q&A. I'll take any of your pre-submitted questions first, and then, of course, any live questions from the live audience. Thanks for joining me this evening. I hope this was a helpful point of contact. And for on behalf of the people that love you and the people that you love, thanks for showing up and being willing to do your work. It makes all the difference in the world, and it's a sign of your love. Have a great evening. I'll talk to you this Thursday. Bye-bye.